It all began when Isabella and James Morrison moved into Meadowbrook Commons, a sprawling condominium complex nestled in a quiet American suburb. The condos were neatly arranged in four-story buildings, each connected by breezeways and balconies. Manicured lawns and flower beds lined the walkways. On weekends, residents might chat near the mail kiosks or lounge by the communal pool, occasionally greeted by the faint hum of distant traffic. Isabella and James, both in their early 30s, were deaf. Their hearing levels varied. Isabella had been profoundly deaf since birth, while James, though also profoundly deaf, could distinguish certain vibrations or extremely loud sounds. They communicated primarily through American Sign Language, ASL, accompanied by gestures and occasional speech attempts when absolutely necessary. They fell in love years ago at a deaf social event, drawn together by a shared sense of culture and language. Now they were starting fresh in Meadowbrook Commons, excited to meet new people and settle into a more spacious condo than they'd had in the city. Word around the complex was that the new neighbors were some deaf couple, though few residents grasped the nuances of deaf culture. Most were either politely curious or indifferent. But one person in particular, Lucinda Farnell, a middle-aged woman on the HOA board, privately known among certain neighbors as Karen, immediately took issue with the notion of strange gestures in the hallways. She did not know or care about deaf culture. She simply believed that silent conversations looked suspicious. To her, anything unfamiliar was automatically a problem. At first, the Morrisons had no inkling that Lucinda, or any other neighbor, might harbor hostility. They assumed they would enjoy a peaceful existence like everyone else. They had chosen Meadowbrook Commons for its wheelchair-accessible design, wide hallways, and the promise of a safe environment. On move-in day, a few neighbors greeted them kindly. One older couple, seeing Isabella signing rapidly, smiled and offered a warm wave. Isabella smiled back, grateful for the pleasant welcome. Yet behind her own drawn curtains, Lucinda Farnell, this self-appointed guardian of order, observed the commotion with growing disapproval. She had already begun rummaging through the HOA rulebook, searching for any clause about excessive or disturbing behavior in common areas that she might twist to her advantage. If there wasn't a direct prohibition on sign language, she might try to spin it as lobby loitering or visual disturbance. As a board member who prided herself on enforcing all regulations to the letter, Lucinda felt certain she would find a way to rein in these unusual new neighbors. Within days of settling in, the Morrisons' presence became more noticeable around the building's corridors. Because both were deaf, they typically conversed in sign language while walking to and from the elevator, occasionally pausing in the hallway to finish a sentence. Many neighbors found it fascinating or simply paid no mind. But Lucinda Farnell seethed. It was bad enough that these two used the hallway as a space to wave their arms around. But the real trigger for her was the sense that something was happening around her that she couldn't control or eavesdrop on. One afternoon, Lucinda saw Isabella and James signing animatedly outside their condo door, Unit 2F. She marched over, arms folded, wearing her usual stern expression. James noticed her approach out of the corner of his eye and tapped Isabella's shoulder so they could face Lucinda. "Excuse me," Lucinda said, voice tight. "We have rules about congregating in the hallways. This is a common area, not a living room." Isabella and James exchanged a glance. James pulled out his phone, opened a speech-to-text app, and typed a quick note. "We are talking briefly. We live here. Not blocking hallway. Not loud." He held the screen up so Lucinda could read. She gave a curt sniff. "Look," she said slowly, as if addressing small children, "I'm part of the HOA. We prefer that residents handle personal conversations inside their units, not right in front of their doors." Isabella offered an apologetic smile, then typed back, "We do not speak. We sign. Just finishing conversation. Sorry for any confusion." She tried to convey politeness despite the tension. Lucinda frowned. "Yes, well, please keep it inside next time," she snapped before stomping off. James and Isabella watched her retreat, unsettled. They had never before been told not to talk outside their door, especially in a building where neighbors routinely chatted in the hallway. Something about Lucinda's demeanor hinted at deeper hostility than simply enforcing trivial rules. Over dinner, the Morrisons discussed whether the confrontation was a one-time annoyance or a sign of bigger problems. Maybe she's just that type, James signed, referencing the typical HOA enforcer. Isabella nodded, wanting to give her the benefit of the doubt. They decided not to let it ruin their positive outlook. But a kernel of worry took hold in their minds. Meanwhile, Lucinda sent a terse email to the HOA board that evening. Subject: possible hallway loitering violations. Board members, I've observed a new couple, Unit 2F, engaging in lengthy discussions right outside their door on multiple occasions. This could be a violation of the rule about common area usage. Let's consider sending a formal reminder that hallways are for passage, not lingering. Regards, Lucinda Farnell, HOA Board. A couple of board members skimmed the message and rolled their eyes. They recognized Lucinda's pattern of petty complaints. The HOA president, Mariella Cox, privately decided to hold off on any official notice. She didn't see how silent conversations posed any real problem. But Lucinda's complaint was now on record, a seed of conflict soon to grow. Despite the undercurrent of tension from Lucinda, the Morrisons began to form bonds with kinder neighbors. Some recognized the couple's deafness as an opportunity to learn basic signs. A retired teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, left a welcoming note on their door, scrawled in neat handwriting, inviting them over for tea. When they responded with a typed letter graciously declining because they had a busy schedule that week, she still brought them homemade cookies. Others greeted them with waves or friendly smiles, though the communication barrier meant deeper conversations needed paper, text messages, or some sign language. One day, a teenage neighbor, Sierra Brown, tapped Isabella's shoulder in the hallway and shyly signed, "Hello. I learned sign in high school." She was not fully fluent, but her effort warmed Isabella's heart. James beamed as Sierra stumbled through a few basic signs. Name Sierra, nice to meet you. The encounter gave the Morrisons hope that their deafness might be embraced as something new and interesting in Meadowbrook Commons rather than a nuisance. Even the property manager, a middle-aged man named Tom Peterson, tried to be helpful. He asked if the Morrisons wanted visual doorbells installed, devices that flash lights instead of ring. The couple, who had experienced issues with missing visitors in the past, were thrilled. Tom told them the HOA budget might cover partial costs because it counted as an accessibility improvement. This small step reassured them that the community, or at least its leadership, might be supportive at heart. But every silver lining has its cloud. As neighbors grew more curious about sign language, sometimes pausing to watch James and Isabella's hands move gracefully in conversation, Lucinda took it as a sign that those deaf people were drawing unwarranted attention. In her mind, they were flaunting their differences. She disliked how some residents were now praising the Morrisons as an interesting addition. She began to feel overshadowed. Her carefully cultivated image as the go-to authority was threatened by the newfound fascination with deaf culture. Dark thoughts festered. If a confrontation about hallway chatter wasn't enough, maybe she'd find another angle: noise complaints, child safety concerns, or graffiti if the couple ever hung decorative signs. She told herself she was just protecting the building's order and reputation, but in truth, her irritation grew from a place of prejudice. The seeds of malice lay dormant, waiting for a spark. Over the next few weeks, Lucinda's frustration mounted. One day, she saw James using a rolling laundry cart in the corridor, signing passionately with Isabella about something that made them laugh. She scowled from around the corner, convinced they were mocking her. Another time, she overheard two neighbors praising the Morrisons' quietness, how they never complained about noise, never slammed doors. The implied contrast with Lucinda's constant demands burned her pride. She decided to escalate matters by sending an email to the entire building, disguised as a general reminder. Subject: hallway courtesy and proper conduct. Dear residents, please remember that our hallways are for walking only. Lingering, loud chatter, or disruptive gesturing can impede others' ability to pass comfortably. Thank you for respecting everyone's right to a calm environment. Sincerely, Lucinda Farnell, Meadowbrook Commons HOA. The phrase disruptive gesturing caused a ripple of confusion. Many recognized it was likely aimed at the deaf couple. Some neighbors privately cringed, deeming the email discriminatory. Others shrugged. Still, it gave the Morrisons a pang of alarm. They read the note posted on the communal bulletin board and realized that disruptive gesturing must refer to their sign language. James clenched his fists in anger. Isabella fought tears, feeling singled out for something integral to who they were. They approached Tom Peterson, the property manager, who assured them the email wasn't an official HOA directive, just one board member's attempt to remind folks of courtesy. Tom apologized on behalf of the complex, encouraging them not to worry. He assured them they were well within their rights to sign in the hallway. But the damage was done. The Morrisons felt the sting of prejudice overshadowing their daily routine. That evening, Isabella posted a heartfelt message in the building's private online group, addressing the disruptive gesturing phrase. She explained that sign language was their means of communication, no more disruptive than speaking. She politely asked for understanding. A flood of supportive replies followed. "We stand with you. This is your home. Sign as you like." But hidden among them was a short, anonymous comment reading, "Then keep it behind closed doors." Many suspected Lucinda. The hostility was simmering, a conflict on the verge of boiling over. Despite the negativity brewing, the Morrisons tried to remain optimistic. They found small joys in everyday life at Meadowbrook Commons. Using the pool early in the morning when it was quiet, baking cookies to share with helpful neighbors, enjoying the wide balcony that overlooked a patch of landscaped greenery. They told themselves that one petty board member wouldn't overshadow all the good. Yet Lucinda was far from done. She spied from her window as Isabella taught Sierra Brown how to sign the alphabet near the mailboxes one afternoon. She saw Mr. Sterling from Unit 1A greeting James and sign, "Hello, how are you?" spelled out laboriously. It infuriated her that some neighbors were indulging the deaf couple's language. She dreaded a future where sign language might become a normal sight in the building, something she viewed as bizarre or disruptive. Around this time, the HOA had bigger fish to fry: budget reviews for upcoming roof repairs. Mariella Cox, the HOA president, had no patience for Lucinda's nitpicking. She told her to relax and let people live. Feeling ignored, Lucinda let resentment fester, fueling a sense that she alone must restore standards. A hateful idea sprouted in her mind, one she'd never have considered under normal circumstances. But prejudice, left unchecked, can lead people to vile extremes. She mulled over it for days, swirling the notion that if she made her hostility more visible, the Morrisons might get scared enough to limit their sign language in common areas. The thought was monstrous, yet the echo chamber of her own mind rationalized it. She told herself she was defending the building's dignity. Then, late one night, the building's corridors were quiet. The hush of HVAC systems and the occasional hum of the elevator were the only sounds. Lucinda crept from her condo with a small can of spray paint hidden in a plastic bag. She headed to the corridor near Unit 2F, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. Her heart pounded, half from adrenaline, half from fear of being caught. Still, determination, twisted by bigotry, urged her onward. She found a spot near the Morrisons' door, just to the left on the cream-colored wall. With shaking hands, she scrawled vile phrases about strange gestures and "stop your silent freak show," punctuating them with a nasty slur referencing deafness. It was obscene, hateful language. Lucinda's face burned as she wrote, a part of her screaming that this was too far. But she pressed on until the hideous words glistened wet under the corridor's fluorescent lights. Satisfied and terrified, she stuffed the spray can away and hurried back to her unit. Her hands shook as she locked the door behind her. That night, she barely slept, mind reeling with guilt and triumph. She convinced herself it was necessary, that her vile graffiti would keep the couple from ruining the building any further. Unbeknownst to her, a security camera had recently been installed at the corridor's far end, meant for general safety, ironically. It captured only a partial silhouette, not a clear face, but enough to confirm that the vandal was a woman wearing a dark hoodie. By morning, the hateful message was scrawled for all to see. The next morning, Isabella left the condo to take the trash out. James was in the shower, so she stepped into the hallway alone. As she turned toward the elevator, the large, black letters caught her eye. Hateful phrases reading, "Stop using strange gestures," and more vile slurs directed at deaf people. She froze, heart pounding. The sight of that hateful graffiti, so close to their door, left her breathless with anger and fear. Within minutes, James joined her in the hallway, alerted by her frantic message on his phone. He stood in stunned silence as he read the venomous words. Though deaf, he felt their sting as sharply as any hearing person could. Anxiety rippled through both of them. Who would stoop to such hatred? Neighbors emerged, drawn by the commotion. Gasps and murmurs of disgust filled the corridor. Some residents quickly took photos, shaking their heads at the vile language. Sierra arrived, eyes wide and tearful. She touched Isabella's hand, signing, "I'm so sorry. This is horrible." Another neighbor ran to fetch Tom Peterson, the property manager. Meanwhile, Isabella felt tears well up, her worst fears about Lucinda's hostility realized in the ugliest way. Tom arrived, jaw set with anger. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. He had to shout a bit, so James and Isabella read his lips and watched his gestures. He promised to file a police report and alert the HOA board about the vandalism. "We'll check the corridor security camera," he added, voice trembling with fury. "I am so sorry this happened." Within an hour, the police arrived to document the incident as a potential hate crime. They took statements, photographed the graffiti, and told the Morrisons they'd investigate. The hallway buzzed with whispered conversations. Some residents offered immediate help. Should we paint over it now? Should we wait for forensics? The police told them to hold off until they gathered evidence. So the hateful words remained for the rest of the morning, a jarring reminder of bigotry in a building that prided itself on neatness and order. By midday, the HOA president, Mariella Cox, called an emergency board meeting to address the issue. Lucinda Farnell feigned ignorance, offering insincere expressions of shock. "I can't believe someone would do such a thing." Her performance made a few board members suspicious. They knew she despised the Morrison Sign Language, but with no direct proof. Yet, she insisted she was innocent. "We must find the culprit and punish them severely," she declared with false righteousness. In the meantime, Tom asked the Morrisons if they felt safe staying in their unit. Shaken, they nodded. The hateful graffiti weighed on them like a dark shadow, stirring fears that the vandal might do more. Still, they refused to be chased away from their new home. As soon as the police gave the all-clear, Tom Peterson and a handful of neighbors organized a repainting session. They refused to let the hateful message stay on the wall any longer than necessary. By late afternoon, they rolled a fresh coat of cream-colored paint over the vile scrawls, obliterating the words that had so disturbed everyone. The hallway's usual calm facade was restored, but the memory lingered. Yet in a beautiful twist, several residents decided not to stop at merely covering the graffiti. They painted a small, tasteful mural beside the Morrisons' door, a stylized hand signing, "I love you" in ASL, framed by gentle swirls, and the words, "All are welcome." It was subtle enough to not violate any HOA guidelines about hall decor, but visible enough to send a message of unity. They added a short plaque reading, "We support sign language here." Before finalizing it, they quickly consulted Mariella and Tom to ensure no official rule was broken. The board gave a hearty nod of approval, except for Lucinda, who glowered at the idea. When Isabella and James saw the mural, tears welled up. They signed repeated thanks to the neighbors, some of whom responded with shaky ASL signs. "We love you," or "We stand with you." It became a small, collective triumph over hatred. The hateful graffiti ironically spawned a creative expression of acceptance. Word spread beyond the building. A local deaf community group heard about it through a friend of the Morrisons. They offered to host an Intro to ASL workshop in the Meadowbrook Commons recreation room. Tom jumped at the idea, seeing it as a way to educate neighbors about deaf culture. The board, led by Mariella, approved a mini budget for refreshments. Only Lucinda Farnell voted no, still pushing the claim that hosting niche events might be a misuse of HOA funds. She was outvoted, fueling her resentment further. On a Wednesday evening, the rec room filled with curious residents. A deaf instructor, Ms. Alvarez, introduced basic signs, greetings, feelings, everyday words. Isabella and James assisted by modeling dialogues. Even children attended, giggling as they spelled out their names and finger spelling. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, bridging hearing and deaf worlds. Lucinda lurked outside, peering in through the glass door. She refused to attend, arms crossed. She saw neighbors who once politely tolerated her now enthralled by sign language. As bitterness churned, an uneasy realization nagged her. The hateful act she or someone like her had committed had backfired, igniting a wave of acceptance instead of fear. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, aided by the building's corridor security camera. The partial footage from that night showed a figure in a dark hoodie, about the height and build of a woman. The angle never caught her face, but something about her stance and posture suggested it could be Lucinda Farnell. Keen observers even noted the same style of shoes she typically wore, sensible black flats. The police, though, needed more conclusive evidence. Tom Peterson and Mariella Cox also reviewed the video. Mariella's brow furrowed as she recognized the silhouette's mannerisms. "It sure looks like Lucinda," she confided to Tom. "But we can't be absolutely sure." Tom sighed. "We need more. If this goes to a legal scenario, a partial silhouette might not be enough. But if we can show a pattern, her hostility, the timing, maybe get the footwear matched, who knows?" They decided to share the footage privately with the board. When Lucinda saw it, her face paled. She blustered excuses. "That's not me. Could be any woman here." The board remained unconvinced, but had no immediate proof. Officially, the police labeled the incident a suspected hate crime, but they lacked enough to file charges. All they could do was keep watch, hoping Lucinda might slip up or someone might come forward with more info. Nevertheless, the building's residents had formed their own conclusions. Gossip spread that Lucinda must be guilty. She was the only one who repeatedly complained about sign language. She had a record of petty crusades, and though no one had publicly confronted her yet, tensions bristled whenever she walked by. Some neighbors refused to greet her. Others challenged her when she tried to impose minor rules. Lucinda felt the shift in social dynamics. Her authority was crumbling. Far from scaring the deaf couple away, she was fueling a community surge of empathy for them. Adding to her frustration, the deaf family's new door mural and the budding interest in sign language signaled that their presence was more accepted than ever. Her hateful act had produced the opposite of its intended effect. She seethed, undone by a plan gone drastically awry. The Morrisons, though touched by the solidarity, still wrestled with fear. Late at night, they wondered if the vandal might strike again. They installed a small door camera, a ring of LED lights that flashed when triggered by movement. James tested the device meticulously, ensuring it captured a wide field of view in the corridor. Isabella joined online groups for advice on handling hate incidents, gleaning tips about personal security. Support poured in from the deaf community. The local Deaf Cultural Center invited James and Isabella to speak about their experience. They hesitated. Publicity might draw more negativity. Yet they recognized the potential to highlight the prevalence of ableism. After discussing it, they decided to share a short statement for the Deaf Center's newsletter, hoping it might encourage others to stand up against discrimination. Meanwhile, the quiet wave of sign language interest among neighbors grew. Sierra Brown, the teenager, started teaching basic ASL sessions for kids in the building, meeting in the courtyard once a week. She used simple games, guiding them through the alphabet and basic vocabulary like colors, animals, and family signs. The children loved it. They felt like they were learning a secret code that wasn't so secret after all. Gradually, the atmosphere in Meadowbrook Commons brightened. The vile graffiti incident sparked an outpouring of kindness, overshadowing one hateful person's actions. Though tension with Lucinda remained, many neighbors realized they had more in common than they'd thought. They shared a desire for a safe, welcoming environment. For James and Isabella, each new day brought a blend of healing and vigilance. They refused to let fear define their life. They walked the corridors with heads held high, still signing to each other, greeting friendly neighbors with warm smiles. They decorated their interior with deaf art, photos of deaf community events, and a small sign reading, "Hands that speak, hearts that listen." If Lucinda hoped to silence them, she was failing miserably. As the weeks rolled on, neighbors took more steps to cultivate inclusivity. ASL classes continue. Ms. Alvarez, the deaf instructor, hosted a second workshop in the rec room, focusing on conversational sign. Attendance nearly doubled. People laughed, fumbled with signs, and left eager for more. Isabella and James served as guest guides, demonstrating real-life scenarios like ordering food or discussing the weather. Hallway signage. Inspired by the graffiti cover-up, a few creative souls asked if they could hang small, decorative posters in common areas saying things like, "In this building, "We support each other," or ASL friendly zone. The board agreed, aside from Lucinda, who cast the lone dissenting vote. Soon, tasteful signs adorned the walls near the mailroom, depicting hands spelling out "Welcome" in bright letters. HOA-backed statement. Mariella Cox, as president, issued an official statement condemning the hate vandalism, reaffirming the condo association's stance on non-discrimination. She also announced that any evidence linking a resident to such an act would result in strict fines and possible eviction proceedings. Confronted by these developments, Lucinda found herself increasingly isolated. She complained about tacky posters or unnecessary classes, but no one took her side. Even her few board allies distanced themselves, realizing the public had no tolerance for bigotry. One neighbor, Alan Friedman, summed it up in the building's forum. "At first, I was indifferent about sign language. But this hateful act woke me up. Now, I want to show that we won't stand for such prejudice. If you're deaf or hearing, you deserve respect. Period." Many upvoted the comment, praising the new sense of unity. The transformation from a run-of-the-mill condo community to a supportive environment for deaf residents was both surprising and heartwarming. People realized that inclusion didn't require grand gestures, just a willingness to learn a few signs, greet neighbors with kindness, and push back against discrimination. The Morrisons, once strangers, were becoming cherished members of the Meadowbrook Commons family. Then came the day of reckoning for Lucinda Farnell. The police concluded their investigation, determining that the partial camera footage strongly implicated her. They lacked enough evidence to pursue criminal hate crime charges in court. Her face was never clearly shown, and she denied ownership of the hoodie. However, the HOA board had more freedom in deciding internal penalties for residents who violate rules or codes of conduct. At the next board meeting, packed with neighbors eager for answers, Mariella Cox presented the findings. She explained how the figure on camera matched Lucinda's height and build, wore shoes identical to one she had been seen wearing earlier that day, and carried herself in a distinct manner. Additionally, her track record of complaining about the Morrison sign language provided motive. While it fell short of a legal conviction, the evidence left the board convinced of her guilt. Lucinda tried to protest, voice rising. "You have no proof. I would never stoop to that level. I was home all night." But no one believed her. The tension in the room was palpable. A hush fell as the board members conferred. Finally, Mariella read out the board's decision. Because vandalism in a hateful manner violated multiple clauses in the community's code of conduct and tarnished the reputation of Meadowbrook Commons, they were imposing the maximum allowed fine under HOA bylaws. This included costs for repainting, potential legal fees, and an additional penalty for hate-based harassment. The total fine was steep, well into 4 figures. In addition, Mariella stated that if any further incidents of harassment occurred, the board would consider legal action to force an eviction. The crowd murmured approval. The Morrisons, seated in the front row, watched Lucinda's face redden with humiliated rage. She insisted she was innocent, but the board's verdict stood. Neighbors glowered at her, arms crossed, determined not to let her slip away unaccountable. Leaving the meeting, Lucinda marched past the Morrisons with a sneer, but they felt a sense of relief. The official condemnation might not fix everything, yet it validated that the community had chosen the side of justice. The next few days were tense for Lucinda Farnell, now widely referred to as Karen, even by those who once politely avoided that nickname. She found hateful notes in her mailbox, though ironically, some were too cruel, stooping to personal insults that served no good purpose. She saw neighbors turn away when she entered the elevator, leaving her to ride it alone. The circle of isolation closed in on her. One afternoon, in a last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation, Lucinda posted a lengthy message on the building's forum claiming she was framed and referencing lack of real evidence. The outraged responses poured in. "Stop lying. You did this to yourself. We stand with the Morrisons." The negativity weighed on Lucinda like a heavy shroud. She felt the control she once wielded slip away. A week later, real estate flyers appeared outside her unit. Whispers circulated that she had put her condo up for sale. Indeed, Lucinda had decided she couldn't bear living in a place where no one trusted her or adhered to her views on proper behavior. She found a buyer quickly, someone from out of town, unaware of the building's drama. By the end of the month, She quietly moved out, her once prized position on the HOA board vacated with barely a farewell. For many residents, her departure was a relief. The hateful presence behind the graffiti was gone. Yet some found it tragic that it had come to this. Prejudice had cost her not just money, but her home and standing in the community. The Morrisons, though, felt mostly relief. They had no desire for further conflict. They simply wanted to live peacefully in their new home. With Lucinda gone, the atmosphere in Meadowbrook Commons warmed even further. The deaf awareness classes continued. Ms. Alvarez eventually taught a monthly ASL cafe session in the rec room, where neighbors could practice simple dialogues with each other. Sierra Brown's small group of teen signers grew. They started a chat thread in which they spelled out memes and jokes. The building's private forum had an entire section dedicated to sign language tips and deaf culture events. Isabella and James found themselves at the heart of a budding micro-community of signers. They never asked to become ambassadors, but they embraced the role. They planned casual meetups in the courtyard, wrote guidelines for deaf-friendly communication, like facing them for lip reading, using texting apps, etc. The more neighbors learned, the less they stumbled over misunderstandings. Some nights, the Morrisons would sit on their balcony, sipping tea, the hush of the complex around them. They'd sign about their gratitude, how they'd never expected such a hateful act to spark so much positivity. True, they still carried the trauma of seeing vile slurs scrawled by their door. But that memory was balanced by the kindness overshadowing it. Meanwhile, the HOA board, minus Lucinda, worked more smoothly. They updated the building's code of conduct to explicitly ban discriminatory language or behavior. They also clarified that the hallways were public thoroughfares, but short, friendly conversations, even in sign language, were obviously allowed. Common sense, Mariella Cox quipped, that we apparently needed to put in writing. Eager to wrap up any lingering tension, Tom Peterson invited the Morrisons to a casual dinner with a few board members, celebrating the new era of Meadowbrook Commons. Over potluck dishes, they toasted with glasses of lemonade. To unity, they typed on their phones, raising them for the deaf couple to see. Isabella and James responded in sign, smiling brightly, to acceptance. Months later, the Morrisons integrated seamlessly into the condo community's fabric. They joined volunteer committees. James helped plan the summer barbecue. Isabella assisted with the community garden. They even performed a small ASL poem at the winter holiday party, enthralling neighbors who had never seen such expression before. Sierra Brown, now a high school junior, considered pursuing deaf studies in college, inspired by her friendship with the Morrisons. She sometimes walked with them to local deaf gatherings, eager to immerse herself in a culture that welcomed her curiosity. She credited the hallway graffiti incident for sparking her path, an irony not lost on anyone. Occasionally, an out-of-the-loop resident might ask, "Who put up that mural near 2F?" And the story would be recounted. How hateful graffiti turned into a symbol of solidarity. The new resident would react with shock that such bigotry existed in a place so seemingly idyllic, but they would also marvel at how strongly the community had united to reject it. As for the deaf couple themselves, they kept thriving. They planned to start a family in the near future, secure in the knowledge that Meadowbrook Commons was a place of acceptance. They told visitors that if not for the vile vandalism, they might never have discovered how deeply caring their neighbors truly were. The adversity revealed hidden allies and sparked a broader movement for deaf awareness. In that sense, Lucinda Farnell's hateful act accomplished the opposite of her intention. She had meant to silence the Morrisons, to shame them into hiding their sign language. Instead, her crime catalyzed a wave of understanding, an infusion of deaf culture, and a proud mural proclaiming acceptance for all. One crisp Sunday afternoon, Isabella and James strolled through the hallway, returning from lunch. As they neared their door, they paused by the painted mural, still fresh after occasional touch-ups. The stylized hand signing, "I love you," glowed softly under the corridor lighting, while the phrase, "All are welcome," curled around it. A neighbor who was passing by made the sign for hello at them, then said softly, "I'm learning." The Morrisons grinned, signing back, "Awesome. Keep practicing." This neighbor turned out to be someone who once felt uncertain about deaf culture, someone who might have sided with Lucinda's complaints if not for the wave of empathy triggered by the vandalism. Walking into their condo, James and Isabella closed the door behind them, hearts full. They had weathered a storm of hatred, only to see it transform into a beacon that guided others toward acceptance. In the quiet comfort of their living room, they signed a conversation about the future, perhaps hosting more sign language socials, or even a deaf movie night, with open captions for hearing folks. The possibilities felt endless. Looking back, it was surreal. The darkest moment in their new home was the spark that birthed a renaissance of deaf culture in a once typical condo complex. This might have been unimaginable when they first discovered that vile graffiti, hearts pounding in fear. Yet from the ashes of bigotry rose a new sense of unity, hand in hand. And so, Meadowbrook Commons carried on, a community transformed, where signs of acceptance, literal and figurative, hung in every corridor, and deaf or hearing all found a place to belong. A single act of hatred had failed spectacularly, replaced by a story of hope, the story of how one deaf family brought a neighborhood closer, one sign at a time.